Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I trust you had a great weekend. I'd first of all like to thank Raman Yang from CCTV Africa for the interview on Friday about oil and the new normal. And that made me write about oil over the weekend, where I wrote US emerges as the new price setter for the oil market. The price of oil simply crumbled last week. Brent crude slumped as low as $69.78 a barrel on Friday, lowest since May 2010. Brent crude peaked at $115.71 in June. WTI fell to the lowest since 2009, closed at $66.15. Last time I looked was near 64. The sharp fall last week was triggered by OPEC, who refused to throttle back supply. US oil production has risen to 9.077 million barrels a day, the highest level in weekly data from the Energy Information Administration going back to 1983. Output will climb to 9.4 million barrels next year, the most since 1972. On the 13th of October, I said the conditions, and I will explain them momentarily, are optimal for a complete washout. A blow-off bottom was a more earthy description in my time, down as far as $50 a barrel. That prediction of $50 looks in sight now. I said then it is the US that is the new price setter for the oil markets, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. This was confirmed by Miswin Mahesh, a London-based commodities analyst at Barclays, who said in an email to Bloomberg, OPEC's decision means it is over to you, America. This opens the window for the US to be the new swing producer. The meeting in Vienna merely confirmed that the US has wrestled control of the oil markets. President Obama, while getting creamed in the midterms, has been a very subtle, skilled and hard-nosed exponent of currency and now oil warfare. This plan to undercut oil was exquisitely constructed and executed. The Russian ruble has been crushed. The Russian central bank has dropped $100 billion defending the currency. Iran might have got an extension, but the new oil price normal keeps them on the ropes. Venezuela's oil income has fallen by 35% and is set to tumble further. This is a very 21st century shock and awe, and a bullet has not even been fired. Of course, there is collateral damage. Nigeria has devalued the naira and are going to have to devalue further. The naira fell 7.3% in November, the most among 24 African currencies tracked by Bloomberg. The Angolan kwanza is at a record low. East African oil and gas has crashed and burned. Tallow oil has slumped 50.175% in 2014. Africa oil has slumped 67.822%. The markets are calling it. The call is very bearish. The sector is set to be mothballed. The oil price collapse marks a major inflection point. The global consumer is back. The value of the stimulus is worth $1 trillion just in North America. So very interesting times, remain fluid. We've written about it a few times, but we've seen some dramatic moves in the last few sessions. Mindspeak returns this Saturday, the 6th of December at the Intercontinental. Our guest is Frank Matzart, who's the CEO of Trademark East Africa. We serve breakfast from 9:30 at the Intercontinental. It's free to attend. And there is a little link I'll put up where we did a little trailer about what Mindspeak actually is. Staying with oil, I take you back to the 13th of October when I asked who kneecapped oil, and I said then I thought $50 a barrel was an objective and that markets overshoot. Crude oil does it big time, and every model needs to consider such a price outcome. Home thoughts. I like this quote from the Dalai Lama: choose to be optimistic, it feels better. I took this photograph of the sunrise out of my bedroom window. I hope you like it. And I love this Lao Tzu quote: men are born soft and supple. Dead they are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead they are brittle and dry. Thus whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death. Whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. The hard and the stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail. And then finally I'll put up another photograph I took of some flowers in the garden yesterday. I like this photograph from The Guardian: deer trapped in the headlights. And then the FT had a piece about first-class air travel, and I got 3 examples: first class on Singapore Airways, first class on Qatar, and then they built this spectacular airport where I sort of overnighted one night, and Air France's La Première. Political reflections: Hosni Mubarak was cleared of all charges. This was entirely predictable, particularly because if you were going to find Hosni Mubarak guilty of anything in his reaction, you were going to jeopardize al-Sisi. Russian warships entered the English Channel amid tension over Ukraine. The squadron conducted exercises in the area. According to a spokesman for Russia's Northern Fleet, at least 4 vessels, led by the anti-submarine ship Severomorsk, planned drills in the expansive water separating England from continental Europe. NATO said the foray isn't alarming, it's normal maritime traffic. The alliance has sent jets to intercept Russian planes more than 400 times this year, a 50% increase from 2013. This is the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. The ruble tumbled in its worst month in more than 5 years as the oil slump put it under pressure. Recent tensions in the NATO have centered on aerial encounters. Russia also moved warships towards Australia on the eve of a Group of 20 summit. This month, UK Prime Minister David Cameron said the flotilla was a symbol of international machismo. And my conclusions are that oil and currency warfare levels, particularly pointed at Russia, is now at an extreme level. President Obama said the only people with the right to object to immigration are Native Americans. Interesting analysis by The Guardian via an Italian academic, which shows in Syria, ISIS appears to be dramatically losing the battle for hearts and minds. Well, they never won it anyway, with more than 92% of tweets, blogs and forum comments hostile to the militants. Outside Syria, support for ISIS, always a minority among online communities, rises significantly. 47% of studied tweets and posts from Qatar, 35% from Pakistan, 31% from Belgium, 24% from the UK, and 21% from the US, which tells us that IS really is a Qatari baby and a Saudi one. We all used to belong to a great and proud nation. Now everything is fragmented and ruined. We have nothing. All of us have become beggars and refugees in our own land, Iraq. Pope Francis and Istanbul's Grand Mufti Rami Yaran prayed together in the Blue Mosque. We went there once, it is extraordinary. Francis then paid a visit to Hagia Sophia, the most important cathedral of Orthodoxy for almost 1,000 years. We visited there as well. And there is a pillar there which is cold and drips water. And it's really remarkable. Istanbul is an extraordinary city. Erdogan is extraordinary as well. Everybody's opening Pandora's box. Everybody's got a grievance. Everybody's got something they think they're owed. Currency markets: euro 124.51, dollar index 88.22, touched 88.451, a 4-year high. Japanese yen 118.93. The dollar hit a 7-year high of 119.03 against the yen. Swissy 0.9666, pound 156.12, Aussie 0.8446, touched 0.8417, which is a 4-year low. India rupee 62.24, South Korean won 11.1641, the Rial 256.59, Egyptian pound 7.1468. They slaughtered Qatar $2.5 billion, which they owed. South African rand 11.34. I think that's going to 12. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I'm looking for it to go a lot higher. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart, looking for it to go to parity. Inflation was last at 0.3%, which is a 5-year low in November. It's going lower given the oil price. Commodity markets: the Standard & Poor's GSCI index of 24 raw materials fell for a 4th consecutive month, decreasing 11% in November and widening the decline this year to 24%. Crude oil, I'll put up a 3-month chart, $64.69, touched $64.10 early this morning. It's now fallen more than 40% since June, below 70 for the first time since 2010. This is a big shock in Caracas, it's a shock in Tehran, it's a shock in Abuja, said Daniel Yergin, Vice Chairman of Englewood, author of the very brilliant book about oil. There's a change in psychology, there's going to be a higher degree of uncertainty. If the governments aren't able to spend to keep the kids off the streets, they will go back to the streets, and we should start to see political disruption and upheaval. The majority of members of OPEC need well over $100 a barrel to balance their budgets. If they start cutting expenditure, this is likely to cause problems. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar can live with relatively lower oil prices for a while, but this isn't the case for Iran, Iraq, Nigeria, Venezuela, Algeria, and Angola. Strong demographic pressures feeding their energy and budgetary requirements. The price of crude is paramount for their economies because they have failed to diversify. Oil and gas provides 68% of Russia's exports and 50% of its federal budget. Putin was quite sanguine. He said winter is coming and I'm sure the market will come into balance again in the first quarter or toward the middle of next year, he said in Sochi. Even before the price tumble, Iran's oil exports were already crumbling. Production is at a 20-year low. Exports have fallen by half since early 2012 to 1 million barrels a day. Rial down 80% on the black market. Another very effective example of currency and oil warfare. And it is the US, as I said, on the 13th of October, which is the new price setter for the oil markets. I think we're headed to $50, and my point is that Barack Obama has taken control of the crude oil cockpit. He is in charge of the airplane. He has control of all the instruments. And it has been a wild ride for the last few weeks. That was in October, which could get a whole lot wilder, which it did. Put up a 1-month chart of crude oil as well. Gold, I said on the 3rd of November, my article was the unwinding of the super cycle will take gold below $1,000 an ounce. Last trading at 1151.79, fell very sharply to as low as 1142.90. Silver fell 6% to a 5-year low below 1450. The Swiss were looking at a measure, had it been improved, would have compelled the Swiss National Bank to more than double its gold reserves. And that was turned down. Coming to Africa, over the weekend we learned that there were more than 1,000 new Ebola deaths counted since Wednesday. The death toll has neared 7,000. And this is the point I was making, because everybody would say to me, Ali Khan, malaria, look at the numbers, and then look at Ebola. And I go back to the piece I wrote on the 20th of October when I said Ebola's severity lies in speed of infections, the escape velocity. I've recently discovered an outstanding contemporary intellectual thinker called Paul Virilio, who said the following about electronic money. The effectiveness of electronic money lies in its mass, which increases its velocity of circulation. Virilio claims that as the last post-industrial resource, acceleration exceeds accumulation. The escape velocity becomes the equivalent of profit. So my first point was that the Ebola virus is not about the absolute number of cases, it is about its escape velocity. Viruses exhibit non-linear exponential characteristics. And I said, we have not yet entered the parabolic phase when the escape velocity is at its fastest, and therefore the comparison with malaria and influenza might be an irrelevant comparison. Put up a photograph of President Francois Hollande having his temperature measured upon his arrival at the Donker Hospital in Conakry, Guinea. That was on Friday. First Western head of state to visit one of the West African countries worst hit by Ebola. Brought a message of hope to Guinea. There is hope, said Hollande, the hope of those who have been cured, the hope that we can control this epidemic, the very fact that hope exists. He was given a very big standing ovation. He also said the departure of Blaise Compaoré can serve as a lesson to a lot of leaders, not just African ones. You don't change the constitutional order for personal gain, he said. Why Angola, Uganda and Somalia need to be on a revolution watch list, a study from Population Action International, reveals that between 1970 and 2007, 80% of all new civil conflicts occurred in countries with at least 60% of the population younger than 30. PAI's findings are reinforced by empirical analysis by Henrik Jordahl at the International Peace Research Institute, who found that even after controlling for level of development, regime type, total population size, and past outbreaks of conflict, countries with a large youth bulge were 150% more likely than those with more balanced age structures to experience civil conflict in the last half of the 20th century. Today, most of Africa is getting slightly older now, having reached their youngest points a few years or decades earlier. But there are a few exceptions, and these are countries that need to be on a revolution watch list. Angola is one of the countries in Africa, and that's going to come under pressure with this oil price drop. In 2010, its median age was 16. Uganda, median age about 15 since 1995. Somalia, median age was 16.1 in 2010, compared to 17.5 when its central government collapsed in 1991. And I take you back to, I was making these points in that article, Ouagadougou's Signal to Sub-Saharan Africa. And I said, the tipping point for this accelerated sequence of events was President Compaoré stacking Parliament in order to extend the presidential term limit. There are plenty of African presidents who are seeking to pull off the same magic trick, and events in Ouagadougou have surely put them on notice. Martin Aglo, a law student from Benin, told Reuters, after the Arab Spring, this is the Black Spring. During the Arab Spring, now in the bleak midwinter, nearly all commentators spoke of how this North African wildfire could not leap the Sahara and head to sub-Saharan Africa. The reasons were that the state, incumbents, had a monopoly on the tools of violence and would bring overwhelming force and violence to bear. We need to ask ourselves, how many people can an incumbent shoot stone cold dead in such a situation? 100? 1,000? 10,000? This is another point. There is a threshold beyond which the incumbent can't go. Where that threshold lies will be discovered in the throes of the event. Therefore, the preeminent point to note is that protests in Burkina Faso achieved escape velocity. Overthrowing incumbents is all about acceleration, momentum, and speed. Out of a population of 17 million people in Burkina Faso, over 60% are aged between 17 and 24 years. The country's youth flex their muscles. What's clear is that a very young, very informed, and very connected African youth demographic, many characterize it as a demographic dividend, which for beautiful Blaise Compaoré turned into a demographic terminator, is set to alter the existing equilibrium between the rulers and the subjects, and a rebalancing has begun. President Compaoré, I'll put up a photograph of him, he was called Beautiful Blaise. The Tanzanian president returns to find parliament and people alike outraged by the latest corruption scandal. The CCM is looking for a way out, having spent much of November convalescing in the US after prostate surgery. President Kikwete came home to find a country in turmoil over the escrow account scandal and demanding action. Yet again, corruption is dominating politics and the media. Foreign Affairs Minister Bernard Membe recently described it as by far the most serious challenge Tanzania has to face. Urgency of decisive action has now been underlined by developments in Parliament in Dodoma, where an attempt by Prime Minister Mizengo Pinda to prevent a highly sensitive corruption debate from taking place was firmly overruled by Speaker Anna Makinda. As a result, over the past few days, members of Parliament have proceeded to debate the explosive findings of its Public Accounts Committee regarding a host of questionable payments involving power producer Independent Power Tanzania Limited. Tanzania's Parliament voted to dismiss ministers, senior, including the Attorney General, the Energy Minister, and several other members of Cabinet. Moving on, over the last 2 decades, the Obiang dictatorship has mastered the art of bread and circuses, keeping an iron fist in a beautiful velvet glove. This is on the news that AFCON, the football, is going to be held in Equatorial Guinea. Obiang has realized that as long as he keeps people distracted with appearances by Julio Iglesias, the Spanish football team, the African Cup of Nations, and other similar entertaining events, he and his family can continue to commit human rights violations with impunity. Washington Times has written an interesting piece saying, in its war to create a caliphate across Syria and Iraq, Islamic State is opening a new front in North Africa, where affiliated militants are wreaking havoc in eastern Libya and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Kabila coup plot, which was in South Africa. The suspects have been acquitted in South Africa. I'll put up a photograph of Etienne Taratibu Kabila, head of the Union of Nationalists for the Renewal of the DR Congo, has been accused of plotting to topple the government. Things are getting very murky over there in Kinshasa, but they're always murky. South African all-share up 7.901% this year, back below 50,000. And I read an interesting piece about South Africa being the only African country to have hosted Formula One races, with the last one being held at the Kyalami racetrack. A decrepit and in debt Kyalami recently looked in danger of being bought by developers who would have torn it apart for housing. However, it was saved by Porsche for 20 million. I'll put up 2 photographs, one from the recent visit we made to Kyalami with Jaguar Land Rover, and the second was from an earlier visit where I took a photograph, and it is a very iconic site. Dollar rand 11.44. I think it's going to 12. Egyptian pound steady as you like at 7.1468. Egyptian stock market down marginally, 0.19%. It's up 37.23% year to date. Naira briefly touched a record low of 180.90 on Friday before bouncing a little. I think it's going to 200. And it's all about the oil price. Nigerian oil share down 16.4133% year to date. Explosions killed more than 100 at a mosque in Kano. We have counted about 109 dead bodies at the Murtala General Hospital alone, apart from the ones at Nasarawa and Bamili hospitals. The US State Department said in a statement last night that the attacks, while as yet unclaimed, have all of the hallmarks of Boko Haram and the group's disregard for human life as it continues in its efforts to destabilize Nigeria. 2 explosions went off on the premises of the Central Mosque near the Emir's Palace in Kano. followed by a third in a crowd of worshippers. At least 3 gunmen fired into the terrified crowds before security officials arrived. After multiple explosions, they also opened fire. I cannot tell you the casualties because we all ran away. I'll put up a photograph of the Emir of Kano. His name is Sanusi Lamido Sanusi. He was the central bank governor. He is on the liberal wing of the faith, and I think for that he is in the crosshairs of the Boko Haram. Nigeria at war, expert says, as talk of military takeover to end Boko Haram crisis grows. A lot of people on blogs and social media I think the military could intervene. Soldiers might stage a coup and try to impose control. Some Nigerian blogs and social media comments have claimed that Goodluck Jonathan is using Boko Haram as an instrument to break the North's back forever. And this is a very dangerous strategy, in my view, ahead of a February election. Abu Bakr Shekau has already told Goodluck Jonathan, we're in your city. And I was writing about that in April 2014. I said the comment could have been made by the Al-Shabaab. Both Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab represent a risk that David Lipton did not touch on, that being asymmetric risks. The recent bombings in Abuja and last year's attack on Westgate confirmed the potency of asymmetric risks. 24th of November, I wrote about Nigeria being in the eye of the storm. 8th of September, I spoke about the insurgency tail risk. And insurgency tail risk remains, and how it plays out will have important consequence for ourselves here and the entire Africa Rising narrative. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of the poster at the Africa Rising conference in Maputo earlier this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange dipped 0.56%. It's up 5.641% year to date. I like this photograph of mist rising above the forest as dawn breaks over Gomashi village, Gomashi, in the DRC. Going back to that point I was making about oil being mothballed in Turkana, Tullow oil is down 50.175% year to date. Africa oil is down 67.822% year to date. Limuru tea closed at a record high on Friday. It's rallied 137% year to date. This is all about the arbitrage between the share price and the net asset value. Limuru is now prime real estate, and this is not reflected in the share price. Kakuzi as well closed at a record. It's up 131.57% this year. Kenya shilling trading at 90.20. Nairobi all share up 19.48% year to date. NSE 20 up 4.669% year to date. Once again, thank you kindly for stopping by. I hope to see you at Mindspeak on Saturday. And if the stock market's your game, then just register on rich.co.ke, get a password, go to Rich Live, and you're plugged into the stock market. Once again,